Real estate is about freedom, choice freedom, time freedom, and money freedom, and the impact you can make with that freedom. But it doesn't come without cost. Your freedom takes work. That's why Neil Timmins brings together the tools you need to build your real estate legacy, from tips and tricks to interviews with industry titans. It's all here in one place. Real Grit. Let's get to it.
What if I told you you can make 20 times the return of a single family fix and flip on your next big deal? Well, it's actually possible. It's possible inside the world of commercial real estate. Say, I'm inviting you to this free challenge. It starts August 15th. It's totally free. It's a 5-day challenge where I'm going to take you and deep dive into the world of commercial real estate, more specifically, capital multiplier properties, what that is, how we identify them. I'm going to show you how to identify them, how to evaluate them, and how to lock them up risk-free. I'm going to give you all the paperwork to do it. It's totally free. You can sign up to join us at www.20xprofitchallenge.com/real grit. That's www.20xprofitchallenge.com/real grit. And I'll see you in the challenge. On today's episode, Raphael Collazo, he's a licensed real estate agent specializing in retail, office, and industrial. And he's an investor, owns apartments. We talk a lot about how his experience as an owner has helped serve him well becoming a commercial real estate agent. How growing up with the parents in the military and in the armed forces, and him living in multiple places all over this world, how that served him well becoming an adult. And then we talk about his books. He's got a couple different ones there before you sign a lease and before you buy that building. So I'm excited to have him on. Raphael Collazo coming right up. Raphael, I'm excited to have you here. How are you?
Doing great, man. It's a beautiful day today. Very productive so far, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So am I. I am too. But tell me, we all started someplace. What was your first entry point into real estate?
So I actually went to Arizona State studying engineering. And while I was at Arizona State studying, my mom got into the residential space as a residential agent. And she actually encouraged me to get my license when I was in college. And, you know, as an 18, 19-year-old, you don't usually just listen to your mom or really any of your parents at all.
Yeah.
And so I really wasn't interested at that point in time. And then once I got more into my professional working career, I started looking at other opportunities right around mid 2019. And I started looking at getting in the agency side first on the residential route. And then I found commercial real estate. Yeah. And ultimately that's what I decided to pursue. So I got my license and then I've been operating in the brokerage space on the commercial end since mid 2019. So
what made you make that decision to go to commercial versus residential?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, obviously my mom had been in the business since 2009, 2010 timeframe, and she built up a pretty sizable business for herself in Southern Arizona. And, just having the conversations with her about the day in the life and the clients that she deals with, I just kind of figured it wasn't something I'd be interested in doing. It's a very, the home buying process is a very emotional experience. And,
yes.
The things that she had to deal with, I was like, I don't even know if I could handle that. Like, I'm very much a black and white type individual. I come from an engineering background. So, the numerical aspects of commercial real estate kind of spoke to me more. And, I've already, I've dealt in the investment space on my own. I own a multifamily property myself. So I knew how to kind of speak to the investment side. And then I had a small catering company in college where we sold pasta to different, organizations and did some corporate lunches and stuff. So, I could speak to those experiences when I'm dealing with the clients that I ultimately deal with. And so that's kind of what made me decide to pursue the commercial route as opposed to the residential front.
Yeah. So talk to me about, the first year in commercial real estate as being an agent. What was that like?
To be honest with you, it was pretty brutal. You're not really doing a whole lot of deals. You're a lot of cold outreach, a lot of just shaking hands. And I'm not from Louisville originally. I moved here in late 2017. So, the dynamics in Louisville are very interesting because it is very, not necessarily cliquey, but it's a lot different than other cities that I've been around where there's a lot of transplants in the market.
Yeah, right.
Here. That's not necessarily as common as it would be in a DC or Phoenix or LA, et cetera. And so, they're a very tight knit community. So breaking into those, areas can be somewhat difficult at times. And so the first 6 months of my business career, it was a lot of cold outreach, a lot of joining organizations, a lot of shaking hands and joining boards, et cetera, just to kind of familiarize myself with the dynamics in the city. And then once I started gaining a little bit of traction, COVID hit. And so, March 2020, as we all know, everything shut down.
Right.
And you're kind of at home by yourself, kind of twiddling your thumbs because all the business clients that I was working with were like, yeah, I think we're going to wait because we don't know what's going to happen over the next, 3 to 6 months or whatever else. And so, yeah, it was an interesting year to say the least. But from that, obviously, I got really involved in the digital side of things and started a YouTube channel, did podcasting and everything else. And that was through almost necessity, where it was like, how can I continue to engage with the market that I'm ultimately serving? And that's what I decided to do. So.
Yeah. And it sounds like as a result of that, it's really spurred some activity for you to be able to achieve some results. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's pretty cool now that, I'm starting to gain a little traction on, obviously the podcasting front and then the YouTube side. I got almost 2,000 subscribers on YouTube and, I've gotten several opportunities through it, clients that I'm starting to work with as a result of them seeing content online and then reaching out to me because they deem me an expert. So
talk to me about asset classes. What asset classes do you primarily work in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're actually operating in I'm in a boutique firm. So we do a little bit of everything. And, when I first started, I did office, I did retail, I did industrial, I did multifamily. But, I would say the most common property types that I've been focused on as of late have been, the retail side, especially on the leasing front. I work a lot with franchises, several franchise clients we're looking for new locations for. And then, I've been doing some industrial leasing and then all multifamily as well, especially in the smaller multifamily, under 20 units. The 4plexes, the 8plexes, the 6plexes, et cetera. And so I feel like that's probably what I've done most of over the last year and change. So yeah, but retail especially, I think, has been kind of my specialization over the last year and a half.
Based in the last year and a half, where do you see investors getting it really, really right?
Where do I see them getting it really, really right?
What are they doing well? Where are they getting in home runs, whether it's asset class or whether it's how they operate or how they buy?
Yeah. So the investors that I serve, especially on the retail front, are business owners. So they are, people who own liquor stores. They're people who own other types of operating businesses. And then they use the income from those businesses to buy properties. Yeah. So they buy little strip centers or whatever else. And the cool thing about owning an operating business is that, let's say one of those units goes dark. Several of my clients are like, oh, it doesn't matter if they go dark because I'll just put a business in there and I'll make 20 grand a month from a liquor store, for example.
Yeah.
So, having the verticals to say, okay, you know what, this asset's great for me, not only from an income side, but let's say one of those spaces goes dark, I can fill it with my own business and even make more than I was before. And so, I would say in those situations, it's like a no-brainer to really, execute on that front.
Kiyosaki's cash flow quadrant comes to mind, ESBI, right? Where the business owner, is earning income and then placing it in the I quadrant, they as an investor to earn it at passive level. And sounds like you've been serving that clientele very well.
Yeah. And even those that don't necessarily put their business in there, like, I have clients that are making a fortune in their business. And then they're just like, you know what, I got 100K in the bank. I need to allocate it somewhere. So let's go buy a small strip center, so they buy a small strip center or they buy like a standalone building, fix it up, and then they lease it up to one of their friends. And obviously that's a community piece too, because, depending on what community you're in within the city, there's always people communicating and interacting with one another. So those types of deals tend to naturally occur.
Sure. Where do investors screw it up? Where are they todally missing the mark right now in today's environment?
Again, emotion, when it comes into the analysis piece, is where things happen, right? So I've seen some properties go for prices that I'm just like, I have no idea how in the world you can make the numbers work. And a lot of the money that's coming in from outside of the market is ultimately the money that is getting allocated to some of these properties. And so some of the local investors are like, there's no freaking way I could, pay what they're paying. But for them, maybe compared to what they're getting in another market, that may be something that they're open to. But, I also think that, this continual pushing of rents, it only can go so far. And so, if you're allocating a pro forma that says in 5 years, we're going to be at double the rents in order to make your numbers work, obviously that's not a very smart approach. And so I feel like there's more and more people, especially in the very hot property types, like the multifamily and industrial, that are taking that approach, which I don't think is a very smart approach. But again, it's served them well to this point. So maybe I'm, naive in that front, but it's definitely an approach I would not take.
Well, things cycle for a reason and they don't stay at the highest of highs for all time, right?
Absolutely. And there's only so much you can push the income, right? Because if people can't afford it, if people lose their jobs, if wages aren't keeping pace with what rents are, at a certain point, there will be an inflection point or an issue, right? So
You can ask whatever you want. Doesn't mean it's going to get paid for, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I do all the time when I talk to sellers. It's like, yeah, you may want $2 million for it, but it's worth 500, So like, whatever you want doesn't mean anything.
Correct. No, it doesn't matter at all. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell me about your apartment and your investing experience. What was that like? How did you find the deal? And your biggest takeaways past dollars and cents. What have you learned most by being an investor, and then into maybe how it served you as a broker?
Yeah, no, I think having an owner's perspective when you're serving clients is extremely crucial because, I can talk about things that I've done in my investing career that could apply to my clients. And so they take, me a little bit more seriously when I can come from that perspective. As far as how I got into the investing space, I actually got into it when I was still at my previous career, which was software consulting. I bought a fourplex and then I house hacked that fourplex. And that's how I got into the side. So I managed the property myself. I handle a lot of the general maintenance on the property myself. And that kind of taught me a little bit about how to manage a property. As far as, new stuff that I've been working on, my buddy and I, we started a development company and we're looking to do retail redevelopment projects. And so we haven't finalized a deal as of yet. We're actively looking in the market to get our first deal under contract and then ultimately close on that property. So applying the lessons that I've learned in the brokerage space into now redeveloping retail property is ultimately, the value that we're trying to add.
What has you leaning into retail?
Just experience. I think, when you get a lot of at-bats in retail, it's like, okay, like I know what tenants are looking for. I know, the things to look out for in retail investment opportunities. I have tenants that are looking for space. So in those situations, it's like, since you're operating in the market already, the ability for me to add value is a lot more simple than it would be for someone who just doesn't operate in that space. So that's the main reason I like retail. And obviously, when you're looking at retail versus, multifamily, for example, retail tends to be a little bit less management intensive than in multifamily, although you can drive rents in multifamily pretty strong. Just the management piece can be quite intensive, especially when you start scaling to a point where it's, 50, 100, 200 units.
Yep. Knowing what you now know, what would you have done differently when you were first starting in real estate?
That's a good question. I think that, I probably would have involved others a little bit quicker. I felt like I was doing a lot of the stuff myself, which I think is important to do when you first get started in anything. I think you really need to understand how to perform a task to the right way so that you can inspect what you expect. Right. So, I think that would be something that I would have done much earlier, in my investing career, just because I felt there were times where I was like doing the work and I'm like, okay, why am I doing this? It's not to my highest and best use at this moment in time. So, that's one thing I would say would probably be a piece of advice.
What's been the most challenging transaction you've had to go through?
The most challenging transaction I've had to go through. I mean, there's been so many that I've worked through, especially when in an environment where it's ebbing and flowing. Earlier this year, I sold a strip center in a submarket just outside of Louisville. And it was in a period of time where, the Fed started hiking rates. And the bank that the buyer was going through was starting to falter as far as their commitment is concerned. So, it was a lot of communication, trying to work with the buyer and then ultimately the seller to try to get an agreement, hashed out. We got it hashed out. It got delayed a few weeks, and the seller was getting really antsy, which was my client. And so that ultimately put the pressure on me. And so, luckily we were able to get the deal done and everyone walked away with their money, but that one was a tough one. And then, earlier, even last year, I sold another strip center that had some environmental issues that essentially had been put into a program called the Brownfields program. Mm-hmm. So essentially what it does is it allows you to put it into this program and pass along the responsibility for the environmental issues at that site to the original owner. So you have to transfer from the management plan, it's called, from one owner to the other when you're actually buying these properties. So it was just a learning experience of how to manage properties that happen to fall in line with those programs. So again, a lot of learning.
I could imagine you learned a lot going through that.
Yeah. And obviously you work with environmental engineers. And so it was just me just asking a bunch of questions. Like I'd be on site with a guy and I'd be like, hey, like, what's this? What's this? What's this? And so it's interesting to me because now it's like, okay, like if I come across that, people think environmental issues and they freak out. It's like, well, actually, I know a program that we can put this in that would alleviate the responsibility for the person who's ultimately buying the property. And I know that now because I've gone through that experience. So if I had come across a property that, let's say, had a dry cleaner there and had, contamination from PERC, it's like, okay, well, we can manage that. It's not That's not a end all be all. Like, it's not a deal killer.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I can imagine those can be significant deal killers if you can't overcome that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, the remediation on some of those sites can be, ridiculous, because they have to bore into the ground and then pour all these chemicals in, and then it just gets very, very expensive. So if you can avoid that from, obviously pursuing this particular program, and I'm sure there's other programs depending on where you're located around the country. I mean, that obviously can alleviate you having to go through that route. You have to pay the fee to apply and then maybe transfer over the management plan, but it's minuscule compared to what you save.
In comparison. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, thinking back to your childhood, what, was there something that you went through or the way you grew up that largely attributes to your success today?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, so my dad was in the Air Force. He was a physician, and I was actually born and raised in Europe. So I was born in Northeast Italy, just off the Aviano Air Base, which is a big Air Force base in Northeast Italy. And then when I was 5, I moved to Germany. I was there for several years, and then ultimately moved to Belgium, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, which is NATO headquarters. And I lived there for several years, and then ultimately moved to Arizona, went to high school and college. So I've never lived in one place more than 5 years. So I'm very adaptable. Like, you could put me in pretty much any environment and I can manage to build a network and do what I need to do. And that's all through that experience. There's obviously pros and cons to that, because, I don't have, the childhood friends that a lot of people have that ultimately can build that network that you see here locally, where, for example, here in Louisville, people know each other from when they were elementary school kids. So the trust factor is obviously much larger, but, as far as an adaptability standpoint, I mean, I feel like I can do that better than most.
Sure.
So.
No, that's interesting. I want to move on to the final segment, what I call for impact. Your favorite quote: "We don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training." What about that resonates most with you?
So I think that, people try to pump themselves up to do things a lot of times, and they rely on willpower to get them through things. But in reality, it's all about the training, the systems you put into place to ensure that results are repetitive. That's why when you are playing any type of sport, you practice the same play over and over and over again. You do the same movement over and over and over again. So you get to a point where it's just muscle memory.
Right.
And so, I think this is the way I've approached my business since the beginning, or at least I've tried to, and obviously you falter here and there, but you try to build out the systems so that it becomes second nature when you do all these different tasks. And so I guess that's the reason why I think that quote's so powerful, is because if you just take a consistent approach to creating systems and, creating actionable, steps that you can take, that's where you're going to achieve success, not in the, how am I feeling today? Because you're going to feel bad a lot of times.
Correct.
And you got to be able to push through that.
Yep. What do you think holds most investors back from hitting their personal next level?
It's all mindset. I think that's the biggest hurdle for a lot of people, is the preconceived notions of what you can achieve. And again, the little voices inside your head that continue to tell you that you can't do it. Trevor McGregor is a coach, and he actually was a master platinum coach with Tony Robbins. And I've had the privilege of working with him several times. And he always talks about the little gremlins in your head that tell you all these different things that you can and can't do. And so learning how to acknowledge the fact that those are there, but then counteracting them and saying, you know what, I choose not to believe what you're telling me. And then obviously putting yourself in uncomfortable positions on a daily basis so that you start morphing into the person that you ultimately want to be. And that's ultimately all it is. It's an iterative process. It's all the compound effect is what it boils down to.
Outside of real estate, what are you most passionate about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say mainly I serve on several boards. I serve on the Board of Junior Achievement, which is a financial literacy into entrepreneurship and work readiness organization that teaches kids and young adults all these different phenomenal lessons that you don't really learn in school. I serve on several boards here locally. One being for the Home of the Innocents, where they help children from disaffected homes to be able to, live a more effective life and a more prosperous life. And they also have an arm that helps with disabled children, and they help them manage themselves. So really just focusing on the next generation of individuals. And ultimately I'm starting to serve on a board here locally for my CCIM chapter, which is the, commercial real estate board as well. And so both obviously on the personal front, especially with the next generation of people, I think it's extremely important to kind of pour into them. And then ultimately in my career, the industry specific boards are really important as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, that leads into the last question of the segment. What's your favorite way to make an impact? And it sounds like maybe you just touched on that.
Yeah, no, those are big ones. You know, I get into classrooms a lot and just kind of speak with students. You know, I also was a Sig Ep in college, so Sigma Phi Epsilon is a fraternity, and I serve on the board here locally. So I go to the university all the time and, you know, kind of offer my advice as far as my personal experiences, both on the engineering side and then, you know, ultimately on the real estate side. And yeah, I would say those are probably the best ways that I do it. You know, those are kind of the main ways that I'd give back.
Yeah. Earlier this year, we launched Real Grit Vault. It's really a collection of resources available to our listeners. I understand you're making a contribution to our vault. Maybe share with it. What have you brought for our listeners today? Yeah,
definitely. And actually a few things. You tell me what you think would be of most value. I've written several, you know, pamphlets talking about a variety of different things. One being the 1031 exchange process. I've also written a couple of books. One being Before You Sign That Lease, the Small Business Owner's Guide to Leasing Commercial Space. It is a comprehensive guide to lease commercial space for business owners. And then Before You Buy That Building, the Small Business Owner's Guide to Buying Commercial Real Estate. So that's a comprehensive guide to purchase commercial real estate from the business owner's perspective. So this would help someone who owns a business and he or she wants to buy a business to house their business in. And so whatever you think would be of value.
I think the book for Before You Buy That Building is wonderful. Be able to provide people's guidance relative to what's, you know, how are people thinking, what you have to go through and give thought to in order to go through that process.
Absolutely. I'm happy to give that. And I'll provide a digital copy.
Yeah, that's wonderful. You guys can get it at www.realgritvault.com. And so you can get that there, a copy of the book. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to connect up here, Raphael. It's you've got a wonderful story about, especially varied background, how you've lived in so many places and how you've leveraged that to a positive and become so adaptable to be able to build a network out and do things in new environments that you're right. A lot of people, there's no way they could do it. They've never been in that experience.
And it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, right? And you know, any skill that you want to refine requires you to put yourself in uncomfortable positions. And that happened to me by necessity when I was a kid, and now, you know, it's a lot more natural to me. Yeah. But you know, if you want to refine that skill, it's like a muscle. You just got to put yourself in those positions. So growth comes on the other side of uncomfortable. Keep putting yourself in that spot. If people they want to find you, they want to follow you, they want to connect with you on any of your channels, YouTube, where can they go? What should they do? Yeah, no, for sure. And obviously, first off, I just want to thank you so much for the opportunity. It's really an honor to be here.
I've enjoyed the conversation.
No, for sure. No. And as far as getting in contact with me, I'm very accessible. You know, you can go to my website at Raphael Collazo. It's COLLAZO.com. You can also check me out on YouTube if it's the same. It's just my name. I also run a podcast called the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast, and we release episodes every week. I also run a virtual meetup called Commercial Real Estate 101 every other week, where we host speakers to talk about a variety of different concepts pertaining to commercial real estate. Those are live, so you can stop in, ask questions, do whatever you need to do. And obviously the book, you know, if you want to grab a copy, a physical copy, they're all on Amazon. So
terrific. We'll make sure all the links you just referenced, we'll make sure we get them put below in the show notes for everybody. Raphael, thanks so much for taking the time to connect up here. I appreciate it.
Definitely. It was a pleasure.
You bet. For everybody here at Real Grit, I'm Neil Timmins, reminding you that real estate requires real grit. See you next time. What if I told you can make 20 times the return of a single family fix and flip on your next big deal? Well, it's actually possible. It's possible inside the world of commercial real estate. Say, I'm inviting you to this free challenge. It starts August 15th. It's totally free. It's a 5-day challenge where I'm going to take you and deep dive into the world of commercial real estate, more specifically, capital multiplier properties, what that is, how we identify them. I'm going to show you how to identify them, how to evaluate them, and how to lock them up risk-free. I'm going to give you all the paperwork to do it. It's totally free. You can sign up to join us at www.20xprofitchallenge.com/real grit. That's www.20xprofitchallenge.com/real grit. And I'll see you in the challenge. If you like our content and want more, you can access it at realgritpodcast.com. You hear it guest after guest. Instinctively, you already know it. But let me call it out. The most expensive action is inaction. The real estate market is full of opportunities. You just need to uncover them. You can build a business that lasts for years, makes monumental impact in the lives of those that you love. It's not just about business, but about the freedom you get because of it. Have you ever heard the saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I believe that partnering is essential. In fact, I partner with hardworking investors all the time. The point is that you can get a lot further with the right partner. Let me say it again, the right partner. If you've ever thought about partnering with anyone, or if you have a partner now, I encourage you to download my free Partner and Profit Guide, which includes the top 5 must-answer questions to evaluate a profitable partnership. You can find it at www.legacyimpactpartners.com. I'll see you in the next episode.